All right, friends, welcome back to another episode of the Strong Life Podcast. Super excited to have a friend, and I'm like a longtime stalker of Matt Nichol. And I heard about Matt in the early 2000s from a mutual friend, Brian Grasso. I was at Brian Grasso's pilot of his IYCA certification, the first
Wow.
ever pilot. And Lee Taft was a guest presenter there teaching speed. Nobody had seen really people demonstrating on speed. And Brian mentions this guy, Matty Nichol, this this awesome coach. And I was like, I'm gonna have to research Matty Nichol now. And I think in for a long time, Matt, I didn't really find a whole lot of information on you. I've come across recently, of course, some podcasts you've done with Paul Check, who's amazing, but you've been
Thank
busy
you.
coaching. You're a coach. And so that, to be honest, was like something that really inspired me. I was like, I got to connect with Matt because I actually know a lot of coaches, and you started earlier than me. And I'm sure you know a lot of coaches that no longer coach. They've gone through these generations of the career, the industry, the internet, and I think they hit a wall, and it just emotionally crushed them. It negatively impacted family, and so I'm really passionate about trying to help coaches, and of course, we're going to talk about training. So first off, welcome to the show. I appreciate it. It's a late night for both of us, but I appreciate it.
No, it's an honor. And it's funny. In this world that we live in. There's a lot of really bad things about social media and the internet that I don't love.
Yeah.
But this is one thing that I do love because again,
Yes.
it's the same thing. We have all these mutual friends, and everything I know about you, just you're my to hit it off. But through this social media connection, finally, 20 years later, we're having this conversation. So this is really cool.
I
I'm honored
know.
to be on the show. Yeah.
It's if we wait another 20 years, Matt, we'll be like grandparents by then. So I'm like really everything with time kind of like hits home. So, it's 8:15 at night for us. We're all 8:25 now. Were you coaching today? Is that why, I was coaching till about 7:30?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I can't. I honestly can't remember a day in the last 22 years that I haven't been. And we're going to get into that, I'm sure. But that's a great thing. When you tell everyone about your passion, the problem is, as working with athletes, theoretically, you could be working 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, because you're always brainstorming about that one guy that's just not quite where you want him, or how do I get to that athlete? How am I going to
Yes.
get them to the next level? So you're always on. I mean, we're lucky that we love it. That's we're both blessed. We love what we do. But yeah, I was actually coaching, in the gym today, but also, I'm always on here for sure. Thank you.
Yeah. So we're going to do a little bit of like a timeline, Matt, of where you started, because it's always interesting to hear a coach's evolution of where the career started, how it evolved. And then I think what would be cool is also get into how because of your knowledge and experience, how you now think differently and really just train athletes differently. So, I started kind of got like full time into this around 2002. I believe you were in the late 90s, maybe even the mid 90s.
Yeah, I mean, I was doing a little bit of. I've always coached, and whether it was kids, I coached kids teams, stuff like that. But I think in terms of being a strength coach professionally for money, that was my full time gig. Would 1998 would have been my first year doing it, so it's a little while now.
And that I always talk about, like, 98, I had graduated undergrad. So I graduated December of 97, January 98. And really a strength coach was not really a term you heard. Still in the late 90s and even early 2000s, the term often used was he's a personal trainer, she's a trainer. And the strength coaches who are at the university level, late 90s, like hit training was a big thing. So I train a kid whose dad works in the NFL. He went to Penn State in the early 90s and he did hit training. He was on the hammer strength machines and the old Nautilus machines, the one all out set, the forced reps, the
Yeah.
negative. So what did in the late 90s your training, or whoever mentored you, what did your training look like when you were training others?
Yeah, well, if you can, I mean, if you think the industry was kind of non-existent where you are, you got to multiply that by 1,000. Like in Canada, we're just it's just such a smaller scale of the business. So, you know, we have probably even, and I'm talking about now today, not 22 years ago. You know, there's maybe a dozen jobs at the professional level. Having a full-time strength and conditioning staff at the university level is a very new thing. You know, we had a strength coach when I played football in college, and he was a well-meaning guy. Had, you know, his heart was in the right place, but I don't think he got paid at all. Maybe he got $500 a year or something. So what kind of effort and what kind of time commitment can you expect from someone like that, right? So when I started out, really, I was exactly that. I was the first paid gigs that I had were as a personal trainer. I was doing strength and conditioning for a couple, you know, some clients that were in the NFL and the CFL. And it sounds cool to say, but really all it was those are my buddies that I trained with. They were my teammates. And I used to go home in the summer and I would train at a powerlifting gym with a bunch of competitive powerlifters. And I trained with a track and field club, and I always did pretty good on our testing. So I was just kind of regurgitating the workouts that I learned. And so I was getting paid to be a personal trainer, and I volunteered my service as a strength coach to these other guys. And it was only after about a year of that it sort of morphed into paid work as a strength coach. So, and I don't, you know what, you touched on something cool, because you know what, I can remember going through a phase where I really took offense to the term personal trainer, because you see what, like, because then it's like I'm looking at that guy at 24-hour fitness and I'm like, I'm not that guy. That's not me.
That's right.
But it shouldn't. But it's a shame, because there should be no shame in that. It should, to be a personal trainer, you should take great pride in that. It's a wonderful, wonderful profession, occupation. But I definitely at that point really wanted to make it clear that I'm a strength coach. That I'm not a trainer. I'm a strength coach.
Yeah.
But in reality, I was a trainer, and that's what I got paid to do.
And where did you come across your first information that transitioned you from, gym buddy knowledge to feeling like you are now doing some sport performance? Even now, I always say strength and conditioning, Matt. I feel like strength and conditioning, but there's so many things that fall under that umbrella. But
Yeah.
who mentored you, or what, knowledge pieces did you come across that got you thinking more sport performance based than modified powerlifting bodybuilding stuff?
Well, I think probably like anybody else. I mean, as a young kid in high school, I remember like going to the YMCA, and you look at the biggest, strongest dude in the room, and whatever he's doing, you try to like casually stalk that guy and watch what he's doing and make mental notes, because you don't want to look too creepy. But like whatever he did, you did that, you did that, and then maybe hopefully you graduate to a better gym where there's stronger guys. And I read bodybuilding magazines, I'm sure, like everybody else did. But when I got to university, and I joined my first real gym, like a powerlifting club, and then my results kind of took off. Then I started to realize, hey, you know what? There is a science to this. There's more to it. And it wasn't our strength coach, but it was one of our coaches on my college team who had a cup of coffee in the NFL with the Patriots at the time, and from a Canadian guy from a Canadian university, which was a really big deal. Even to get a tryout in the NFL was a big deal. And he had really made it that far strictly based on his effort. He was a weight room, junkie. This guy was like a gym rat. And he turned me on to, he had gone to York University in Toronto, Canada, and he turned me on to his professor, a guy named Tudor Bompa. So that periodization of strength, like the first real strength and conditioning book that I ever read. And so that to me, I will always give credit where credit is due. And my thoughts and the things I've read have gone on different tangents beyond that. Right. But that was by far the biggest difference, in my life. You're asking about the resources, the things I read, that would be the one that really sort of blew my mind. And I remember at the time, I just remember that comment about our coach saying, well, if you're a football player, instead of doing 3 sets of 10, you should do 10-3. Instead of running 400-meter sprints, you should run 104-meter sprints as a defensive lineman. It was like, it seems so common sense now. Everyone's doing sports specific training, but at that time, it was like a watershed moment for me.
No doubt. I think in Tudor's first book, it was like block periodization, right? Yeah. So he would have like the strength block, the power block, which is interesting because, you know, I'd say like once around 2010 started creeping around, people started really being so against block periodization. And then I feel like as I got more knowledgeable and worked in a university setting and knew I'd have these guys for a year, I applied block periodization because I kind of was like, all right, we just finished a 6 months, sports season. Now we're going to do a block of some recovery and rebuild and stability and hypertrophy. But Louis Simmons was so like against it. It was like, God forbid if you weren't conjugate all the way. So it was interesting. Also, late 90s Muscle Media magazine was featuring articles by Charles Poliquin. So did you read Muscle Media or mid 90s actually?
No, I read literally everything I could get my hands
Yeah.
on, like every book, every magazine, uh, anything. Like I never had a computer. There was no internet. I shouldn't say there was no internet. I didn't know there was an internet when I was in
Correct.
undergrad. I didn't know. So when I got out into the working world and I got a computer and I got internet and it was like anything I could consume about strength and conditioning, I did. So I definitely read Charles's stuff for sure. I think maybe for me, I had a little bit more. Some of it resonated with me for sure, and there's concepts that I took from there. And I think any strength coach that works privately and makes money doing it enough to pay your rent, you should give Charles a big thank you because he raised the bar for everybody. Having the balls to charge for his time.
Right.
What we're worth. So, but I think my training sort of maybe was a little more influenced by a little more by powerlifting and Olympic lifting and things like that. But it still took a ton of concepts from Charles for sure.
Yeah, I think Charles's first book, if I recall, I probably bought it on eBay, was predominantly bodybuilding focused. Although, and Matt, I jump around a lot, so and I'm sure your brain's good with that. Um, I remember Charles writing an article for Muscle Media on these overload eccentrics. So basically, like it was bodybuilding methods. You would, if you were doing an incline Smith machine bench press at 275 for 8 to 12, your training partners add another 45 to each side. Then you do three negatives with heavier weight. They lift it. And we were doing that in, I'm going to say like 96, 97, 98, maybe. We started doing it. I remember it destroyed me, but my training partners were chemically enhanced. So it worked great for them. But when I read that and then I like, think of Cal Dietz and triphasic and those eccentrics, I'm like, man, I wonder if Cal came across that and somehow that gave him a little bit of an influence of triphasic. But, hearing you talk about how much research you did, I was also like that, Matt. Once I started getting into this, I would go to Barnes and Noble, or I think it was called Borders bookstore here, and I would take the whole stack of books, anything on sport performance, and just read and like abuse coffee and just like read everything and take notes. You know, I'm sure I know your answer to this, but maybe elaborate. I feel great strength coaches are great researchers, like very hungry to learn. So before I, did this podcast with you, I listened to your podcast. I listened to people that have interviewed you to just like dig in more. My bookshelves are bending and I'm always reading. And so when somebody reaches out and says, can you give me advice on, I do give them advice, but then in that advice, I also say, listen, go on my website, use the search button and type in, strength and conditioning business, gym business, wrestling training, squat technique. I tell them because now you're going to respect yourself and the information because you dug for it versus I handed it to you. And I think the 90s, the early 2000s, all of these like seminars and you're mentioning the meeting of that CFL player who made it to the Patriots. These like meetings were very they just had like some beauty to them and mystique to them. And so, you hear of Mel Siff holding these meetings in somebody's garage, or Charlie Francis like meeting people at like a park to do sprint technique with a group of 5 people. And so, now I could just search, and I could come up with it. So when it's easy, it's like, so elaborate on, you were saying earlier, hey, I'm always thinking, just elaborate on that kind of research and that work ethic of a strength coach that you feel is crucial.
Zach, I'm really glad you brought that up. It's a phenomenal question because it's something I think about a lot. But because when we came up, again, I didn't have a computer. I had a Smith and Corona electric typewriter is what I had. I had no computer, no internet. So if you want to know something, you had to have the balls to go and ask somebody, go find a strong guy at the gym, see if he would take pity on you and give advice, or you had to go to the library and figure out how to work the Dewey Decimal System, find your book, read through the book, read the research paper. And you know what? In some ways, it's amazing, like this, virtual, interconnected worldwide web of information. It's amazing because there is so much information available to young coaches now. And I'm so jealous, like it's so cool. But I would say the problem is that a lot of the magic is in the searching for those answers. And I can tell you, you brought up a lot of names. I worked beside Charlie Francis for probably the first 2 years of my career. Literally, like in a indoor track and field center, there was myself, a guy by the name of Rory Mullen, who was the therapist for the Toronto Raptors for about 15 years, and Charlie, every day sitting there, Charlie with a Snickers bar and a Pepsi, telling, grilling us about what we knew, making fun of what we were doing, criticizing what we did, explaining it. Like you could never replace that with any kind of a course. But if you wanted to learn something from Charles or Mel Siff, you'd have to seek out, you'd have to find out what the hell was going on. There's a seminar somewhere, then you'd have to get yourself there. I think there was this barrier of entry that weeded out.
Matt, hold on. My son, he doesn't care that we're podcasting. What do you need?
What do you have for?
It's in the garage, in the corner Tupperware thing. Had to take away his technology as we speak about technology.
Love it.
I think that's, you're talking about the difficulty of it. Sometimes I want to take away the technology from my kids. So read a book, do something. So go ahead, Charles. You're working with Charles. Yeah.
Part of it is this, there was a barrier for you to have been successful. Like there's a barrier for entry where you had to grind it, not just about going and talking to a guy, going to a seminar. You probably had to go into the gym and try the shit out.
You were your own experiment.
You could tell me a story about your hometown. You could describe the street that you drive down and the names of the stores. And if I've got a good memory, I can turn around and I can tell somebody else that story. And I'm not wrong. When I'm describing the street the way you described it, it's not wrong when I'm saying the names of the stores, but I've never driven down that street. I don't know it. I don't actually know. I just listened to what you said, or I read a book, and I see we have a lot of that now. People will stand there, and unfortunately in our profession, it's pretty rampant. They will tell you exactly how shit works because they heard it on a podcast last night. But do you really know? Like, have you done that? Have you lived it? Have you tried it with 10 different people? Have you measured the results?
That's a huge. So I've been around coaches, Matt, who can blow your mind with a spreadsheet, with the ability to use the best software at the university and pro level. But then I watch them coach, and they cannot command the room. They cannot individualize the group, right? The group training, but individualize for this one, for that one. And that blows my mind too. And we're going to bounce around a lot. People who listen to me kind of are used to it. So it's interesting that you said getting under the bar and doing it yourself and then doing it with, training others. You have your own private facility. When somebody interns with me, their first 2 weeks is lifting. They're not just shadowing, and they have to train with the last group of athletes because you're tired. It's 8 o'clock, it's 7 o'clock, you've coached, and I want them to get the feeling of first observing and seeing different groups and how it's different at 4 o'clock than it is at 5 o'clock, even though it might be the same, sport athletes. And then you're going to train on Monday with the high school athletes. On Tuesday, you'll train with the middle school athletes. So you know what it feels like to not touch a barbell for a full workout, yet get a real hard training session with calisthenics and kettlebells and dumbbells. And on the third day, you're going to train with the adults and you're going to do more of the prehab rehab and you're going to really like become that person. What do you, when somebody interns with you, because I've heard of people interning that don't know how to squat or haven't lifted, but they're finishing an exercise science degree. So what happens when somebody interns under you? Does a university student ever intern with you through the school?
Yeah. So first of all, I love that system that you just described. That's amazing, and I can't imagine how lucky those young kids must be to intern with you. That's amazing what you do for them.
They think I'm crazy.
You know what? Good. Well, you know what? They're going to learn. I bet you down the road they realize how lucky they were. But I would say this. So I make it pretty clear to my interns, like we have a very small business. So a lot of places will take on interns because it's a revenue like they've got a business model that necessitates having a large staff. So they take on interns, but really they're just free labor or cheap labor, right?
Yes.
I make it clear to my interns that I don't need that. In fact, if they can't contribute in some way, I don't care what that is. It could be mopping, it could be coaching, it could be therapy. I don't give a shit. But I don't really need it. So if they're just there to watch or shadow, I don't do shadowing because most of my clients are professional athletes or very high net worth individuals. They don't like feeling like zoo animals and some weird guys staring at them and taking notes. So I let them know, listen, if you want to be here, you got to contribute in some way. I don't know what that means. I don't need you to be a free source of labor because I actually have enough employees, but you got to contribute somehow. So if I had a bigger business, your model to me sounds amazing. That's exactly what I would do. But we do right now, and we have different. And the cool thing is, we've had a variety of different interns. A couple. I've had two of my former pro football players come in who were like phenomenal athletes, and they were like leading by example in the way that they looked, and the way that they move, and the way that they lift. I've had a few other guys that I had one of the best interns I had no interest in being a strength coach whatsoever. This guy went on to be a sports medicine doctor, and he was very upfront about it. And he said, "I have no desire to be a strength coach, but I thought, well, what the hell are you doing here for this interview? This is ridiculous." And this is with the Toronto Maple Leafs. And he said, "I want to get into sports medicine, and I want to understand what happens on the application level after people see me." And he said, "I know that I don't have experience. I know that I'm not a lifter. I hope that won't, preclude me from the job. I promise I'll work hard and do whatever you want." And he was phenomenal. Like a bit of a different dynamic, like maybe not the same model that I would normally have, but it was phenomenal. We published a bunch of research. He helped out immensely, like 1,000 times smarter than I am. Really, really great guy. Chris Farlinger is his name. He's a doctor now, successful guy. But I think for me, like I want to have interns that have passion and enthusiasm, and I don't care how they apply. And I tell them, like, especially we have a affiliation with 2 universities here, and I basically say to them, I'm probably going to sign off on your paper whether you suck or whether you're awesome. So you're not going to fail, but what do you want to get out of this? And I like this is your opportunity. You spend a week here, see what we do. How can you make it better here? What do you see that we're not doing well? What do you see that we could do better? Make that your project. I don't care what it is. You pick it,
I like that. I also agree. I had one intern that I had to dismiss, but basically I tell them, don't make my life more difficult. Don't stress me out. Don't stress the kids out. Don't make them feel uncomfortable. And then I grade with them. So I never just grade. So we go through the whole evaluation at the end. I say, okay, here's this question. Grade, what grade do you think I should give you here and why? And then, some of them realize, okay, I was not punctual with the written information that I needed to contribute, or when it came to program design, I didn't go all in on that. And then it gives you an opportunity to talk to them about how, man, you got to fall in love with some of that stuff that you didn't really fall in love with to be great. Let's back up a little bit for a second, Matt. Where were you? Were you at a university where Charles, you guys were in the same room or coaching?
With Charlie Francis or Charles
Yeah,
Poliquin? So with Charlie,
Charlie Francis.
so with Charlie Francis, it was at York University. There's an indoor track and field center. I ran my business out of there. And if he actually was, and he actually still did a lot of coaching at that time. This is just a few years before he passed, but he would train people out of this track and field center. And he was, he's rough around the edges. I mean, he would never hesitate to cut you down with a jab or a joke or whatever. But if he, I guess if he respected your work ethic and respected your desire, he was incredibly generous with his time, incredibly generous with information. It was a really cool experience. And Charles Poliquin, I got to be friends with through one of my first bosses. One of the first jobs I had was working for Dr. Mauro Di Pasquale. And if you're a powerlifter,
Oh my God!
if anyone who's a
Wow.
powerlifter would appreciate that. So I was basically, I don't know what you want to call assistant. I was essentially Mauro's bitch, but I would do, I learned more, just buzzing around and helping him out with odd jobs than
Jeez.
I did in 5 years of university. So
You're there's like that old thing like 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon. You're like 7 degrees of strength and conditioning. I came across Dr. Morrow's work when I was in high school. I used to watch a bodybuilding show on ESPN called American Muscle Magazine. Do you remember that show?
no, we didn't get that in Canada.
Yeah, it was on ESPN. I'd always have to cut school because it would be on like at 11 a.m. on a weekday or 3 a.m. in the middle of the night. And I was so like, obsessed with bodybuilding. And he would, give nutrition information that was really, he was so far advanced.
Uh,
And as a kid, that didn't really resonate with me. But he would talk about like, people now are talking micronutrients, macro. I mean, he was talking about that in 1990, probably before, right? Figure I
I
came
can't even
across.
describe, and like the guy who's like legitimately the strongest guy in the world, pound for pound, in powerlifting, in his weight class, the strongest guy. And like, I remember the first time I met him, I was doing my master's in kinesiology, and he came into our one of our biochem classes, and someone asked him a question, and he picked up a piece of chalk. Again, I'm dating myself a little bit, but and drew out the Krebs cycle
Oh,
on the board and went through it like off the top of his head randomly.
yeah.
And I remember just even our teacher, this is like a master's level biochemistry class. The teacher was just looking at him like, who is this guy? Like
He was a what was his doctorate? He was doctoring
he was
of what?
he was a medical doctor. He was
Medical doctor.
MD, yeah, yeah. But also he taught at med school, and he was a master's student. So yeah, incredibly smart guy, an incredibly generous guy, just
Yeah,
an incredible guy.
right. If you see me looking down, I'm just taking notes. He was, for people who don't know him, what I often say is, we're not going to spill it all. I want you to research Dr. Mauro Di Pasquale. He was really, I don't want to say the originator, but he really brought this ketogenic diet into play for performance. And my buddy actually hired him. My buddy played in the NFL for 9.5 seasons, hired him after his first year to
Oh wow.
recover after patella rupture of like full, knee reconstruction to do his nutrition. And he had him high protein, high fat, and then a carb refeed over the weekends. And he said my friend got huge. And he said one year he actually got too big. And so he was like, Mauro, like I need to lean up and lose like 20 pounds. And Mauro tweaked things up and he lost 20 pounds and his performance was back. But I came across an article in a health and strength magazine, maybe muscular development. I did a video on it it was called the high definition diet from like late 60s, 68. It was essentially the keto diet. It was, high protein, high fat. And then I can't recall if it had the weekends to carb up, but, Vince Gironda then started doing like the steak and eggs diet. So, Mauro, very interesting, Maddie. What you're saying is like, so Mauro was an MD, but he was also a world, champion power lifter. That is when the best worlds combine, where they research, and they have the hands-on practic, practical experience. That's what's huge. And so before I get this ADD with stuff, thinking back, you started in the mid 90s, late 90s, strength and conditioning. When did you start your private facility? You're in the university. When did your private facility open?
So I always, so when I moved to Toronto, I moved in 1998 from Montreal to Toronto, and I worked at a gym. There was this, really kind of high end. There used to be in the Sky Dome, which is now called the Rogers Center. They had a private gym. So any of the visiting teams that were playing the Blue Jays, or actually the Raptors at that time used to play out of the Sky Dome as well. So any of the visiting teams, you'd get some of those that would come through, and they had a lot of exec. It was mostly execs. There had some corporate contracts, but that was my first job there. And then I left there very shortly after, and I ran my business out of the track and field center at York University in Toronto. But I didn't open, and then, I did that for 2 years, and I got hired by the Toronto Maple Leafs, and I worked there for 7 years. So I didn't open my private facility that I'm in now until 2010. So I'd always sort of, I'm not a very savvy businessman, so I've always been kind of about keeping my overhead low. So, working out of somebody else's track than building my own, or paying for a lot of space that I didn't need. So
Yeah, I learned in the early 2000s. You remember Ryan Lee, who's had all the sports
yeah,
specific and the business. Well, Jim Labady used to do the business stuff, and I remember Jim shared this philosophy. He said, my business philosophy is low hassle, high profit. And I was like, boom, that's huge. Now, I know you've been consulting with pro athletes for a long time. My son's pitching coach, his son, my son's pitching coach's son, did a little time with what's the Major League Baseball team, the Blue Jays? Is that?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
he
that's
was
right.
there. Have you worked with the Blue Jays recently?
I have not, no.
Okay, I didn't know if you were. His last name is Leiter.
Okay,
L-E. Yeah, he's a pitcher. Then
yeah,
I think he went to the Phillies. Now he might
yeah,
be
yeah,
somewhere
no,
else.
he was legit. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I've got lots that are currently with that organization or were in the past, but I've never had anything to do with them.
gotcha. So here's my question. You've been coaching various levels, and I often ask myself this in the early 2000s, or kind of around when you opened your gym in 2010. I always say, like, the kids I trained in the beginning, I didn't notice ankles collapsing. I didn't notice, poor posture. I just, I always say it wasn't there. I'd say, we're going to do 10 squats, 10 lunges. You're going to do 5 pull-ups. You're going to farmer walk up the street, and everybody was fine. Now I'm like, what's going on with his feet? His feet are there. His knees are here. And so I wonder, like, was I just not knowledgeable, or you're smarter than me, Matt? What have we
I don't know
seen a
about that.
de-evolution of athletes because of, more technology, more sitting? You working in the pro ranks, they travel so much. I mean, if a pro
Yeah,
baseball team gets like 180 games a year, how many airplane rides are they on, sitting, and time zone change and weird food? I mean, what does that do to the body? So what has your take been on this increase of, our early years? We didn't hear about prehab, rehab. Physical
no,
therapy was not big. Mobility WOD and, Squat University, those guys, we would have been like, that's bullshit. Stretch, foam, like, it was so silly. I think the earliest guys who kind of caught my eye with it was Eric Cressy and Mike Robertson created a DVD called Magnificent Mobility. And I felt like it came at an interesting time, but it didn't really like catch my eye because nobody I was training, nobody had injuries. Nobody needed a knee surgery, a shoulder surgery. I mean, nobody tweaked the back. It's just like we just went for it.
yeah.
Now we see an abundance of issues from the beginning. So, what's your take on that? And how has kind of you've opened your private facility in 2010. What does your training assessment, has it gotten more in depth? Like, let's just kind of dive into this.
Yeah, well, I would say, I mean, you touched on a lot of great points. So hopefully I can get to all of them. But
All right.
I would say that the combination of factors, like I think, you know what, you're right. I see more things now that may have existed 22 years ago, and I just didn't see them. That's definitely possible. But it's not just that. You're right. It's not just that. And I think and like when we get new, like when I say kids, we don't, like a young kid for us might be 15. That's young, right?
Okay.
When we get a lot of these kids, and predominantly they're hockey players, they can't squat. Nobody knows how to squat. They can't do chin-ups or pull-ups. They can't do a lot of stuff. And these are phenomenal athletes. These are phenomenally skilled hockey players, but there's some basic elements of strength and fitness that I think are missing. And I'll tell you one story. So in 2000, there was a lockout in the NHL.
Yeah.
Meaning, so
What year was that again, man?
2004 was there's been one just recently in 2012, but there was another one in 2004, and then before that. But
that first one was big. It was for the contract. Back then, I remember guys were making so much money.
Yep.
And the crowds were like sellout all the time, right?
Yeah. So what happened was in 2004, I didn't know if I was going to still have a job because there was no hockey. But thankfully for me, the management agreed to keep paying everybody's salary. So one of the guys in our community relations department, who's a good friend of mine, Greg Shell, you'll probably never listen to the podcast, but shout out to Greg anyway. He deserves it. Amazing guy. He came down and we were talking one day, and I said, you know what, like, is there anything I can help you guys with? Because like I got all this free time and I'm getting paid. I feel kind of guilty, and we're not allowed to train our players. Now, between you and I, there was a little bit of that going on, maybe secretly, in a gym across the street, but for the most part, we weren't allowed to work with any of the guys. So we came up with this idea. We had something in Canada called the Canadian Standard Test of Fitness. You guys had something in the States called the President's Council.
Oh yeah, of fitness. Yeah.
So we dug this thing up, and when I was a young kid in elementary school, I did it, and I remember because my brother would always get there was like excellence, gold, silver, and bronze. My brother was always excellence. I could never get it. I sucked at the flexed arm hang. Yeah. I couldn't do the 1 mile run, but I tried really hard. We dug this thing up, and we had this really great idea, or so we thought. We're going to go around all these schools, and we're going to test all these kids and see how well. After about 2 or 3 of these schools, we're like, oh my God, every kid is failing this test. This is like,
what age group did you go to? Middle schools?
Yeah, middle school. Yep. And I started talking to guys that I knew around the country in the US, and someone told me they had tried the same thing in the States, and they had to stop because so many kids got injured, and one kid had to be rushed to the hospital, a middle school kid. They thought he was having a heart attack.
When was this? 2004?
Yeah, and I'm like, this is stuff that you and I would have done when we were 8, 9, 10 years old.
That's right.
And I think back now, like every day of my life when I wasn't in school at that age, I was either playing sports or I was climbing trees. Like at recess, I don't know what it's like in New Jersey, but we would play British Bulldog or Red Rover.
Yes.
Or we would just full on fight. They were just full on fighting, like for no reason. Like you'd be expelled from school. You'd be thrown in jail now if you ever did that. So
that's right.
Definitely a level of athleticism that's missing, and it's not a criticism of kids. It's not a criticism of parents. It's not a criticism of teachers. There's not enough phys ed. I don't think we place enough of an emphasis on that. I think it's seen as a frivolous extra thing that you can do for fun. And kids are so programmed now. I mean, if I don't know what it's like in your neck of the woods, but I live in downtown Toronto. If you went into a random school and pulled all of the kids out and told them to climb a tree, how many could do it?
Yeah.
If 2 kids were wrestling on the playground, they'd probably shut the school down. They'd have to bring in grief counselors. Like it would be like it'd be on the news. Like that was the British Bulldog was a normal thing. I'm not parents. I'm not advocating for that. Every year there's broken arms and broken collarbones. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but I'm saying that we got to find some way to make up for that gap of athleticism that we're missing.
It's do you know Jeremy Frisch? Do you
Yeah, I don't know him, but follow him on social media.
Amazing.
Amazing.
he always talks about how roughhousing is so good physically, emotionally, like all that, like teaches the kids how to communicate. But somebody I spoke with, I can't remember if I don't think it was on the podcast, but yeah, we would go to school early to play tackle football. You know,
Absolutely.
now kids are like, I can't, I didn't have time. I couldn't get out. Like we just wanted to play. And
Remember,
so,
it's funny, you're talking about the technology with your son and
yeah,
see the rise of video game. I was laughing, talking with my brother. I remember the best gift, the best toy that I ever had as a kid was an old mattress that we were going to throw out. Convinced my dad to let us keep it in the basement. And we had WWF, like kids would come over. We had guys
yes.
matched up, tag team partners, full on wrestling, like full on backflips, slamming people. Like,
Oh God.
and I'm sure every parent would cringe if they heard that. And I
Scared.
don't blame them.
Yeah.
I am not saying that this is what people should do, but I'm saying it's what we did. And I'm saying that that sort of that mindset, like around just being super active, not being afraid to utilize your body at that age,
Yeah.
it had benefits.
It does. You know, so much hits me. Like you train a lot of hockey players, and we actually, I'm not sure how it is in other parts of the country, but I've got a lot of hockey players. They play hockey, into like August, and they're serious, and they're just, it's like an 11-month thing now. We had one kid a couple years back. I don't know if they do this in Canada, but if you're really good at hockey and you're going to go to a Division I university, when you graduate high school, you go to a junior league for 2 years. You do
Yeah.
not go to college. And supposedly some of the better hockey schools are Division III in this Northeast area, like New Hampshire, Massachusetts. So we trained a kid. He graduated high school. He went to Chicago for 2 years for a junior league, and then maybe went to Sacred Heart. Um, but it's interesting. Also, I think of this, Maddie, is that I I don't know how many Russian coaches came to Canada to help with hockey, but a couple of years ago, a guy who owns a ice skating rink, um, he used to own the New Jersey Devils, and then he sold them. So he still owns the ice skating rink in New Jersey. You if you ever did you ever travel to New Jersey, the Prudential
Many, many,
Center?
many, many times, many times.
Did you guys play at the Prudential Center?
Well, when I was in the league, the Prudential, my last year in the NHL
Yeah.
was the first year that they were in the Prudential Center. Before that, we were over at the other place.
So the Prudential Center is what this guy owns now, but he had brought me in. He wanted me to start training his old high school that he, donated for football. But when he brought me through the ice arena, he introduced me to the coaches, and one of the junior hockey coaches was from Russia. He had like the heavy Russian accent. So I was like, I pay attention to that. That was I was at Lehigh. It was 2015, and it was just interesting that wow, the coaches are leaving Russia to come to America. And I think in the 90s when they did that, that was like you were like a defector if you left Russia, if you were a player, right? Wasn't that like your
Yeah.
your family was almost, it was almost like you left the mob, right? It's pretty serious.
Fortunate. When I was with the Toronto Maple Leafs, we had on our team the very first Soviet player to defect and come over to North America, a guy named Alexander Mogelney, incredible guy. Actually, and he had a massive influence on the way I run my business now. And this ties in with everything that we're talking about because he was a part of something called the Soviet sports school system. So when he was 13, they took him away from his family solely for the purpose of being a hockey player. And they trained twice a day, every day, no days off, incredibly hard training, but they had mandatory volleyball, mandatory basketball, mandatory soccer, mandatory boxing and wrestling training, not because they wanted the kids to have fun. They didn't care about fun, it had nothing to do with fun. It's because they knew that it made them better athletes.
Yeah.
So when I see now 12-year-old kids, 11-year-old kids whose parents say they don't have time to their sports and they don't have time to train because they have to focus. I'm like, this is ridiculous. If the best players in the world found time to do it, not for fun, just to be better, certainly your kid can find some time to do that.
Yeah. Just talk about that guy. Like, did he speak good English when he came or?
Oh yeah, brilliant. So brilliant guy, incredible. And this is a funny story. So by the time I met him, he was late in his career.
How
His
old was
body
he?
was very, very beat up, like very, very beat
Was he in
up.
his 30s already?
Yeah, like which is late. At the time was late for hockey, but
Right.
still incredibly like he should be. I have no idea why he's not in the Hall of Fame. He should be. And if you Google
What's
his
his
name,
name again, Matty?
Alexander Mogelney, Mogliny, electrifying player. Like, and I remember one of the first days and we were having a team workout, and he came in and he was just stretching in the corner, and then he was about to leave, and a couple of the other guys started egging him on and giving him a hard time, right? And, well, come on, Almo, Almo, get in here. Come on, what are you? He's like, and he just walked out of the room. And then he came back walking out later, and he had a pair of suit pants on and a pair of loafers, like looked like he was going to a business meeting. And one of the guys said something, chirped him somehow, made fun of him, and he looked at me and said, "Are you serious?" And he walked over, and there was 265 pounds on the bar. Walked over in his penny loafers with his pants on, got under the bar, dropped down, ass to grass, perfect form squat, sat down there for about 5 seconds, looked at the guy and said, "I was doing this stuff before you were walking," and then just banged out about 5 reps, racked the bar and left. Like he had this incredible training reservoir like that. Like he had probably done, 8 million squats back in the Soviet Union. He had done all the things that we think were new and cutting edge and hardcore in training. I'm sure he had been doing those since he was 14 years old. The Soviet, that Soviet system,
Yeah.
there were a lot of faults. They didn't appreciate the need for some of this prehab or some of the recovery work, but the training concepts were so far beyond anything we were doing. It was such a cool, like you're supposed to be the guiding light for all of your athletes.
Whoop, you froze there for a second, Matty. You were saying be the guiding light for your
Well, I'm
athletes.
just saying that that's the role that you're supposed to. But I
Sure.
think in the case of this guy, I learned more from him than he learned from me. And I just felt blessed to be able to hang around with that guy and work with him. And he was still very hardworking in terms of keeping his health up. He actually finished his career in New Jersey. He played his last year there, but I wish I could have met that guy 10 years earlier, but it was, yeah, really, really lucky to have had the time to be able to ask. And you probably went all these from Elite FTS, all the Russian training manuals.
Yes.
And I would bring them in and I would show him, I'd be like, Alex, look at this. And he would look at it. And some of them, he would look at them and laugh and go, that's bullshit. We never did that, because people would tell you about the Soviet system. Well, this guy lived it every single day. And he would tell me, yeah, we did that. Yeah, we did that. No, we never did that. That's bogus. We never did that. So it was an incredible experience.
I think I remember hearing about this, about some of these books kind of being like they did it once and then they just drew photos of it. What's interesting is, Dr. Yesses wrote, The Secret of Soviet Sports Training in 1974. I was born in 1975. And I remember when I read the book, I was like, okay, this was written, I read the book in 2004 or 2003. So 30 years after it was written. And I'm like, wow, 30 years ago, Soviets were doing this, and we're still not doing it in America. They could be 50 to 60 years ahead. But now, interestingly, we can communicate with other coaches. Some of them come to America, which is pretty interesting. I think like that. Did you read the book, The System? That was co-authored by Johnny Parker.
Yes.
So
I had the opportunity to work with Johnny his last year in the NFL. So I worked with the San Francisco 49ers during his last training camp. And I can tell you, like, an unbelievable coach, but
what year was that, Matty?
2006, 2007.
Oh, I think there was a local kid near me that went there. His name was Anthony. He was an offensive lineman. He came from Rutgers.
Oh, yeah.
I can't remember his name. He, crap.
I don't remember, but Johnny, I can tell you, Johnny, like, I would say this. There was, I don't know how many 80 guys at training camp. There was Johnny and his assistant Dwayne Carlisle,
I know
and
Dwayne.
that's it.
Yeah.
And this guy had, I think he was 65 years old at the time. He commanded the presence, like he commanded everybody's attention. He walked into that room, and you could see any guy would try to give it to him, he would give it right back. The guys they truly love this guy. To see the control, like when we talk about coaching, a lot of times we descend into sets and reps, and I don't like that guy because he does a different periodization scheme, or I don't like that guy because he uses this exercise. But to really appreciate coaching, like the art of coaching, Johnny was a master, an absolute master.
Well, my favorite quote that he said, I interviewed him maybe a year or so ago. He's like, good coaches coach weights, great coaches coach people. Why do you think he commanded the room when he was with the 49ers?
Well,
what did you pick up on?
The one thing he said to me is, he said, my job is to get the guys to do the shit that they don't want to do, but they need to do. That's if you want to be successful, can you get them to do the stuff that they need to do, but they don't want to do?
What was some of that stuff?
Well, I can tell you, like, to be honest with you, I remember my first day there, landed on a plane, guy picked me up in a car. 15 minutes later, I'm standing in the gym, and I expected, now, this is the thing to know about Johnny Parker. Johnny always was the lowest or amongst the lowest man games loss of any coach in the NFL. So the teams that he were on were the, quote unquote, healthiest teams. So what I expected was everybody doing FMS assessments and like tubing exercises and like maybe some machine stuff or whatever. Absolutely not. It was like a prison yard lunchtime work. Like, these were like, guys were like, it was as hardcore as you could imagine. And I remember my very first day, my very first moment there, we were doing dumbbell hang cleans, and it was, like set of 6, set of 5, set of 4, set of 4, set of 4. And at one point, and it's like pretty much for the most part, same set, same reps, same weight for everybody. For the most part, I'm generalizing.
Sure.
It's way more scientific than that. But I remember, like, this guy turned to me and said, "Hey, what's your name?" And I said, "Matt, nice to meet you." He goes, yeah, whatever. He goes, "Matt," he goes, "I'm the backup punter. Why am I doing this?" And I was like, "Man, I'm just like an intern here. I don't know, man. It's my first day." So like, and you know what? There's a lot of things that I saw that I thought, oh, I don't know if this is a good idea. And you know what? It was fine. Nobody got hurt. Everybody was
What did
fine.
you think? Maybe
Strong.
What did you feel was maybe not a good idea at that time?
I don't, and I shouldn't say that. Just think like not a good or a bad idea. I shouldn't have said that at all. What I meant to say was, I had this preconceived notion that because his teams were always renowned for having no injuries, they must have been doing these very pedestrian, controlled
conservative.
It wasn't that at all. But Johnny had he could tell you, down to the pound, the gross tonnage of weight that they were lifting in week 1, week 3, week 7. It was very, very scientific, but he kept that like almost like Apple Computer. Like, if you can't make it beautiful, make it invisible. So Johnny kept that, he's got this Southern drawl and this great sense of humor and like rugged kind of rough and tough, growl to him, but very scientifically minded, everything was very calculated. But he made these guys believe in themselves and made them believe that they were resilient, made them believe that they were strong. And how important is that for football? Right?
Isn't that like, Dave Tate speaks about this, like confidence is one of the biggest transfers of training, possibly the most important. That's why I think, when we see some of these weird things that like professional athletes do, like, why is he doing that crazy shit? It's because he believes in it, and he thinks by doing that crazy stuff, now he's got more confidence. What's actually worse than a pro athlete who does not believe in him or herself? Now Absolutely. We're in very bad place.
And I think that, that it's a very difficult conversation because you know what, now you look at like, I wish that when I was 21 years old, I wish I knew a little bit more about recovery and about,
Right.
you were laughing, you and I before laughing about stretching. Like for me, stretching was, 10 minutes before practice, you lay on the ground and spread your
Yes.
legs, some guy pushes your back down. That's stretching, like I wish I would have known a little bit more about recovery, would have taken care of my body better. I would feel better today. However, that mindset, that mentality that Johnny fostered in those guys by not being afraid to do hard, heavy exercises, there's huge value in that.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. You're talking about how effective that was. I have a buddy that coaches in the NFL, and I asked him, and then I'm going to ask you this question. I said, "Do you ever get like you're coaching a guy, and then you're like, oh shit, this guy's got like a $28 million contract for 4 years. Like maybe I shouldn't even back squat him." He's like, "Dude, if I'm conservative with them, I need to get fired. I'm not doing my job." And I was like, wow. Like I think sometimes we got so, I hate this, we got so smart. We got gathered so much information that now we overthink things versus what we did in the early 2000s. You're like 25, you're 28, and you're like, yeah, man, just fucking lift that thing. You just think differently. So you work with pro athletes. I'd love to hear how you think. And also, I guess a little bit going back to Alexander, what was his last name?
Mogelney.
Mogelney. He was coming in, you're saying a little bit banged up. Was he playing for Russian national team as like a late teenager already? Like a quote, that's like a pro athlete.
Yeah, well, I can tell you. So, yeah, I mean, to answer with Alex, if you're a hockey, he played on a line in junior hockey that would be kind of the equivalent of having like Kobe, Michael, and LeBron on the same line. It was ridiculous.
Jeez.
It was ridiculous, right? These guys were that good. But he didn't, after he left here, he didn't play on national teams because he wouldn't have been welcome. He was a defector, so. But you make a good point, and I would say Johnny Parker had a massive influence on me that way. In that I came up as a guy who like, just go hard, don't be a wimp, put more weight on the bar, just more heavy. But I was always injuring myself in training, not in games. I mean, I broke my hand a couple of times, but I never had any muscle injuries from playing football. It was all from my training for football. So I was a little bit scarred from that. And then, when I started off, I kind of did a full 180 and denounced, everything that had to like, all my powerlifting, all my Olympic lifting, all my or anything by Brooks Kubik was, I loved all that stuff. So, but then it was like, what? I'm working with pro athletes. It's only about keeping them healthy. So I ditched all that, but I would say that working with Johnny kind of brought me back around a little bit to the fact that a lot of that was just my own fear and insecurities. And if I really coach it right and I plan it right, not only is it okay to go heavy and train hard, you have to. That's kind of the nature. So I'm still not as confident as Johnny was, and I'm because I don't have the number of years behind me that he had. I mean, the guy had an illustrious career for 4 decades, right? At the
Crazy.
the game. Yeah. He was. You're a Jersey guy. He was anywhere Bill Parcells went, Johnny Parker was right there because he had to have Johnny. So, and maybe someday, hopefully, I'll have that I'll get to the level where he was. But I know for me, it was impactful. You can't, like your friend said to you, you can't be if you're afraid as a coach. That's no, you're not a good enough actor to pull that off. That's not going to work.
Yeah, you have to believe. So when Alexander was the strength coach there, he's beat up and banged up. What happens? You've got the team squatting or cleans, deadlifts. What was he doing? Did you get to a point where you're like, you know what? Instead of lifting, you should just go get massage or take a nap. You ever?
Yeah, you know what? I didn't go that far, but I think that was where it was good, and it's good to have that balance so that I could resonate with him and say, listen, I need you to you have to be in the gym doing stuff. You don't have to you don't have to back squat. You don't have to deadlift. You don't have to do a clean, but you got to do whatever. And he, like, very early on in his time there, he had hip surgery, and that was our connection point where it was like, okay, you know what? You're stuck with me now. Like, maybe you could have avoided me before, but now we're stuck together. Embraced that aspect. And so he was never against training. He had done more high level training than any of those guys probably combined as a young guy, but it had taken its toll on his body. And I'd like to think that, you know, if he had a more balanced approach as a young guy, he would have had a longer career and he'd be feeling better. But he was still had a good work ethic and just applied it to
recovery. Did you see that documentary? I think it was on ESPN. It was like the Russian hockey teams, and they went
Yes.
through the one guy, I actually related to the one guy. You know, he's got them throwing bricks to each other. They're training, they're like doing a lot of wild stuff. And he was very much like the art of coaching. He didn't really count reps. I felt like it's just auto regulation. And then they got the other coach who they kind of went into these dormitories, they locked him up. He counted exactly how many things. It was less fun. And so, you know, that was interesting to see that kind of like two opposite coaches. And that kind of strictness doesn't work nowadays anymore. I mean, that's
Well, that was something that Tudor Bompa said to me. So I did my master's degree in kinesiology. So coming around full circle, I did my master's, and Tudor was my supervising prof. So I was his last student before he retired.
wow.
So every day for a year was spent, you know, working with Tudor on my thesis. And I remember I used to bring him all these articles all the time, and a lot of it was like stuff I got on Elite FTS, and a lot of it was like former Soviet this or that, or Bulgarian this or that.
Right.
And finally, one time he sat me down. I'm sure he would have wanted to slap me. He's like, "Kid, you don't live in Eastern Europe in 1975. Like,
That's right.
this, you can't." This, he said, "You have to understand. If you lived in Bulgaria in 1980, your choice was, you know, if you be an Olympic weightlifter or go dig rocks in a ditch. You know, like." And if you're a Romanian gymnast or an Olympic weightlifter in Russia or a wrestler, the pool of athletes they had was massive. And you know what?
Yeah.
If they absolutely crush, if there's 10% that make it through, okay, good. We got 10%, you know, like,
Yeah.
it's not necessarily a great model to be running with like suburban kids that are playing Fortnite till midnight. Like, it's not the same thing.
That is so funny that he helped you gain that clarity, because in my early years, yeah, we're like, the Russians did this, the Russians did that. And then you start thinking, you're like, we're nothing like the Russians. So my father grew up in Romania,
Oh,
and
there you go. Tudor Bump is that's his hood. There you go.
yeah, during the communist era. And so my dad tells me about how, like, he's like, the word was that, like, the walls have ears. You never know. Like, your neighbor works for the government, like, people walking through the streets wearing like special suits work for the government. And so every month he, you know, they left Romania. I think he was 12 or 13, but you know, from like age 8 or 9, they would get weighed. The kids would get weighed in their boxers. They moved my father into swimming and boxing at a young age. Yeah, I think he broke his nose at like age 12 or 11. And so
Amazing.
he said that like government came in and removed him from his room. They moved in a female swimmer and her father. And he said if she did good, they bring food, they bring new clothes. If she didn't compete well, they'd show up and take food and take clothing. And
So imagine that, like that training system, when you know that you've got this captive audience where if they don't succeed in their sport,
yeah,
who knows what that's going to mean? I don't know if it's going to mean death or starvation or
right.
a miserable life of manual labor. You can't take that and subject a suburban North American kid to that same routine. It's just not
Yeah.
it's not the same thing. The drive is
It's
not
still
there.
even like I think, and I wonder if you see this too now. Our youth have much higher level coaches because like I work with a lot of wrestlers, kind of the same as you have a lot of hockey players. A lot of these kids who graduated Division I universities, they're all American, maybe national champion. They now open wrestling clubs and start working with youth, similar to how in Russia they had very high level coaches with the youth. But in the 80s, 90s, and even the early 2000s, the youth coaches was like dad who used to play, did a year of like high school hockey or high school this. Now it's much higher level coaches. So we're seeing the younger kids get developed better. We're seeing a different skill level, but ironically, I'm not seeing kids stronger. And I help a former NFL vet with like some training with his son, and this guy played in the NFL for 13 years, so
Oh,
he's
wow.
been around. And so we spoke about his kids are young, 8, 9, and I always just say, listen, at that age, just look at what Jeremy Frisch is doing, but he loves training. And so I said, hey, what's interesting is you're still training so hard, and but oftentimes the strongest guy in the gym in the, whether it could be hockey, it could be football, is often, they say, sitting on the bench right next to the coach. He fell in love with the lifting, but did not fall in love with the skill development and the immersion of studying the sport. And what I was able to do was I married them. I loved getting better at football and I loved training. He's like, training. I'm gonna read the text and let me just dig it up here. Let's see. So we were talking about. Let's see. He said, okay. He goes, training hard, marrying them together is what made me who I am. I loved to train, and that made me a better football player, which was a perfect marriage. And then I said, I'm going to send him some stuff. He said, would be great learning. And then he says, what I texted you earlier was wrong. Training doesn't make you better at anything, but I feel like training allows you to be your best for longer. So
Like that.
it's, if you're weak, all of a sudden everything hurts. But if you train so much, but not enough to the skill, then everybody's at just a higher skill level. And I think you and I probably think, I know this is how I look at it, Maddie. It's like when you're such high skill, you are strong because the better my skill is, the less effort it is for me to do things. That's why I tell them, I go, look, these kids that wrestle in like, Georgia, the country, the state of Russia, um, they, some of them don't actually lift weights, but because they've wrestled for so long, they've technically lifted, other human weights.
Well, I can tell you something.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of different cross training. I played basketball my whole life at a pretty high level. When I did track, when I got to university, I still competed in track and field while I played football. But my last year, I decided I was going to do wrestling as cross training, right? And this
As a
is at the
senior.
time I was the biggest and strongest that I've ever been in my life. By powerlifting standards, is nothing impressive, but I could squat over 500 pounds. I could bench almost 4. I could, deadlift almost 6, and I thought I was in fantastic shape. And the wrestling class that was taught at our university was taught by a guy named Gary Callis, who I think won a bronze medal at the '76 Olympics.
How do I spell his last name?
I believe it's Kalis. He wrestled for Canada, and I don't know, in my mind, he won a bronze medal, or maybe that just makes my story better. I don't know. You could Google it. But either way, he was the only guy that I could wrestle in class because I was. So the next closest guy was probably 220, and then there was a lot of guys, that were in this, 185 to 205
Yes.
kind of. And I remember the first time, he said, "Okay, let's go. It's time for you to spar, and I'll be your guy." And I remember and he said let's go, and I was kind of being cautious, and he's like, "No, let's see what you got." And I remember trying to shoot his legs, and this is I was a pretty big, strong guy at the time, and with every ounce of might that I had, I got one of his legs, and I was prepared to drive him up and into the mat like a football tackle. and he on one leg just held my hand down on one leg for what felt like an hour, but was probably 5 seconds, and then he got tired of that and just picked me up and threw me like it was the most humiliating experience of my life. And this guy looked like he did not look like a fit man. He was like he was not a good 250 or 60 pound guy. Like it was, but just like the brute strength, and then having me on the ground and a 2 minute, like we were doing a 2 minute match, 2 minutes. It felt like I've never experienced like my fingers were tired, my toenails were tired. It was not like anything else. It was not like wind sprints. It was not like any other kind of conditioning. And I think that's something that you can't replicate that in a gym. You can't replicate that on an assault
any sport, right? I mean,
I can't even describe the fatigue of like,
do you, with that experience, Matt, do you look at, with your training for pro hockey players, do you ever say, listen, this is like a piece of the puzzle. When you get in hockey shape, it's because we're playing hockey and you're practicing. What does now, when we look at your training now, when I looked at your website, it looks like you have this prep before the NHL season, and then you have like 25 guys come to camp, and then the other 25 are other pro athletes. Is that what I saw?
Usually we have a group of juniors as well. So these are kids that are NCAA kids or junior kids that are aspiring to be pros, but aren't there yet.
What does, now with like all of these decades of knowledge and experience and lessons from Morrow and lessons from Poliquin, lessons from Tudor, lessons from Charlie Francis, what does it look like now? And also interestingly, like I'd love to hear nutrition stuff that Morrow may have like got into. And also I'm sure, Poliquin and Francis had some real unique takes on nutrition. What does all of this kind of information through like 30 years of coaching and experience, how is it mesh now when you take this group on for a camp? Is there an assessment? What does a day look like?
Yeah, so I mean, I think you take bits and pieces from all of them, and but if there had to be one person now that would probably, if you looked at the foundation of the training that I do now, probably you'd mentioned already with Paul Check would be the one guy that probably would be the biggest influence in what we do now, because after being in this business for 22 years, I realized that regardless of why they tell me that they're here to see me, my goal for them is to make them happier, healthier, better human beings, and make sure that, it's great if I can, put an inch on their biceps or get their bench press bigger, but if I'm not teaching them the lifestyle habits that they have to like take care of themselves and be healthy, really, I don't feel like I'm doing my job. So I would say, and unless you've spent time with Paul, like you might write that off as kind of, airy fairy, light and fluffy stuff. He's one of the strongest guys you'll ever meet in your life in a gym. Crazy. And I'm talking like circus strongman's, like crazy strong. So I think that Paul is the one that kind of woke me up to the idea that you don't have to choose between being healthy and being strong, or between health and performance. They're synonymous. So, but yeah, I do absolutely, like in any given day at my job, like depending on what day you came, like, if you came today, like maybe you would see us doing, and this is why I hate, we talked about interns. I hate having people, hey, can I come and shadow you for a day? Because you know what, if you come on Monday, you might say, nah, all those guys do is track work. They just do a bunch of plyos and short sprints. That's all it is. And if you came on Tuesday, you might say, oh, those guys are a bunch of meatheads. They're just lifting heavy weight. That's but if you came on Wednesday, oh, those guys are soft. All they do is yoga and get treatment. They don't even train, right? Yeah. So we're taking elements of all, and I've learned from, and I think that's why it's easy to be humble when you've been around so many great guys. Like, I could never hold a candle to a guy like Charlie Francis or Charles Poliquin or Morrow or Paul or Tudor or any of these guys. So, but I've been lucky enough to be around to be able to take bits and pieces and plug it into my system. And you know what came and watched me in action, I'm sure they would find 10 things. Definitely Charles Poliquin for sure. I mean, he criticized me more than anybody, but to my face, but I think that any of those guys would find 10 things that they don't like about what I'm doing. But you know what? That's okay, because they're not coaching my athletes. I am. And I'm doing what works, and I know what works for my guys. And I think that's where everyone's got to get to in their careers, to like tune into podcasts like yours, go to your website. You're so open about sharing and bringing other coaches and resources in. Study all of it. Study things that don't like study types of training that you don't like, that you don't do. Know everything, like learn all of that stuff, and then you can figure out what to plug in. Like take a couple drills from Jeremy Frisch, take a couple tidbits from Paul Check. Charles Poliquin has some great stuff. I wouldn't take one of his programs and do it with my guys, all in, but there's lots of elements of things that I do. Correct. That I learned from him. So, I mean, I think it's finding the right combination for you and your clients.
Yeah. And when you went through the list of the guys, I just remember I still have I can't get up, but I have the 3-ring binder. I printed out Charlie France's speed training book, and it was like huge. So I remember I was working at a fitness center and I was living with my parents, and I said to my dad, don't shut off the computer. It's going to print like 40 pages. And it might be 400 pages. And my dad's like,
the dot matrix printer, you got to change that.
Oh, it kept going.
It's over. Yeah. If you don't,
my dad said I had to go out and buy a whole new like thing of paper. So I still haven't. What's so interesting is like, he was, we kind of said it earlier. He was just very common sense. He auto-regulated. If he saw them about to slow down, the workout was over. He did benching. He did squats. He didn't get overly obsessed that they didn't squat all the way down, because he's like, we don't need to squat all the way down, maybe, and that's enough. They're squatting low enough. And they did medicine ball work, and they threw the med balls, and he stopped them before they slowed down. And like today, I had a group of guys speed benching with doubled mini bands, and a variety of strengths. How many reps am I going to do? I say, when I see your first rep, I'll start counting backwards, and I'll let you know how many reps you do. This guy he hit when I go 3, 2, 1. This other guy 8, 7, 6, and I think back in the day, I'd be like 8 reps for speed. No, it could only be 2 or 3, but he was so damn fast. One guy started slowing down. He was done. The rest of the guys did 2 more sets, and they wonder, how come he does 5? I do 3, because I'm doing what you need. So I don't know if I give you the name of the coach, if you have like a outstanding memory of something that really influenced them. But, you mentioned Paul Check. We probably should have spoken about him. What I like a lot of things about him, and under my computer is his Eat, Move, and Be Healthy book. But his nutrition was so like straightforward. He's like, hey, if I'm lifting heavy, I eat a lot of protein. If I'm not really lifting much, I eat like a vegetarian. He's like, but I'm not this or I'm not that. So do you have, like, if I mention Paul Check, is there one thing that, you just still take away from him?
I mean, I
tough question.
Of course, with Paul in 1997. So
wow.
Paul's now become a good friend of mine, and I've trained with him multiple times in the gym. And I can think of like him cleaning and jerking his body weight, single arm dumbbell clean and jerk with his body weight for sets of 6. Snatch grip, overhead lunges with 100 kilos in a pair of Birkenstock sandals and little short shorts.
It's insane.
Like repping out single arm chin ups, repping out like dozens and dozens of single arm push ups. So crazy things like that. But the big thing with me is when I first got to know him, I was enamored with him because I was injured and I was trying to get healthy, but my whole purpose of getting healthy was to go back to lifting super heavy weight. I wanted to be a power.
What was your injury?
Yeah, I had I tore a muscle and I had what's called an athletic pubalgia. So I had a Vols ripped a piece of my pelvis right off, broke a piece of the bone off. It was a pretty painful injury at the time. And I remember that but I didn't want to just go to regular physio. But so Paul resonated with me because here's a guy talking about rehab exercises and Swiss ball exercises in 1997, right? But for the purpose of getting really, really strong, not just to be out of pain. So that I like that jive with me. But once I got to know him, we were sitting having espresso one day, and he said, "Listen, I'll let you in on a little secret. It has nothing to do with the exercises. It's all about your nutrition." I was like, "Wow, okay, all right." You know, and for me, nutrition at that point was just make sure you're eating enough. I was always trying to gain weight. I was trying so hard all the time to gain weight. So nutrition for me was eat enough calories, eat enough protein, end of story, right? He was the first one to teach me about. Once I felt like I kind of had a handle on that, the next time we had that conversation, he said, "I'll let you in on another secret. It has nothing to do with the nutrition either. It's all about your lifestyle." And I'm like, "Oh man, okay." Like I just thought I had it all figured out, right? But the more you learn about that, and then if you really want to take it to the next level, it's all about your mental and emotional health. Because and this is, a lot of people will dismiss this, but if you've worked in pro sports, anyone who's worked with pro athletes, and Zach, you'll appreciate this. How many guys have you seen that have all the talent in the world? They're strong, they're fast, they're skilled, and they just can't do it. They just can't put it together. How many guys have you seen, professional athletes, that have it all? Multi-million-dollar contracts, and they're depressed.
Yeah.
How is so? And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how fast you are and how strong you are and how big your bench is. If you hate your life and you're miserable, that doesn't matter. So he's the guy that really first kind of woke me up to the bigger picture that way. So full credit to him for that.
That's huge. It's going to inspire me to go back and reread his book, Eat, Move, and Be Healthy. And I know he puts out, he's got a podcast. He's got he's still posting on YouTube. He still looks like he's like 30 something years old. I mean, it's amazing.
It's the real deal. That's, you can like or dislike him, and he doesn't care, right? And I should, but like, I would tell you this, there are a lot of people, supposed experts. This is a guy, whether you agree with him or not, and there's a lot of things to disagree with. I can understand anyone that doesn't agree with him or like him. I get it, right? But he's the one true guru, supposedly, that truly walks. It's not an act. It's not a thing he does for show. This is how this guy lives every single day of his life. That's legit.
Nonstop discipline is mind blowing. I mean, I don't know what the actual word I would use. I actually bought my first physio ball from him. It was like that, strongest anti-burst. And ironically, I had tore my labrum. I've had to get my shoulder scoped. And I look back and I'm like, man, dumbbell benching on a physio ball is like probably like the best way I should have done it. All the support on your upper back, your arms, kind of your shoulders smoothly going into something versus, benching on a stiff bench. And him too. He was just like decades ahead. But then we get influenced by this guy and that guy. So what about, I don't want to keep you, Matt. We've been on the call for like an hour and a half. You were with Poliquin, Francis, Dr. Bompa, Dr. Di Pasquale. Who would you want to, like, out of any of them, any other big takeaways that really still shapes you to this day?
Well, I mean, Morrow, I have to always give credit because he took a chance on me for no reason when I was a kid. He had no reason to talk to me or be nice to me. Gave me, he's the reason I got to know Charles Poliquin. He's the reason that I've got to know a lot of these other guys, because if you're Morrow's guy, when someone gets a call from Morrow, like, hey, this kid's a good kid, do you mind giving him, 10 minutes of your time? The answer was always yes, if it's for Morrow. So full credit, full memory I have of him is, I had a big group of professional football players, mostly CFL guys, couple NFL guys, couple NCAA guys, but we would use all of Morrow's supplements, and he helped us a lot, with questions anytime we had medical questions or whatever. And one day he hosted there was two things that happened. One is he moved back up near Toronto, about an hour away from Toronto, and he was moving into his house. And I remember he had a problem with the moving company. And I said, no problem, I got you, let's go. And I grabbed a whole bunch of these football players. I said, look, we're driving to Dr. Di Pasquale, and we're helping to move him in. So we helped move him in. he was very appreciative. And then he said, why don't you invite all those guys back one day, we'll have a barbecue.
Oh,
And I remember and he had a full gym in his house. Like this guy had, he had probably 50,000 pounds of free weight in his basement. It's the first time I'd ever seen. He had dumbbells up to 200 pounds. He had like Bob Sapp used to come and train at his house. Like he had 100-pound plates, which to me was crazy. I'd never seen anything like that. But I remember I said, okay, well maybe we'll come up and we'll do a workout, and then we can have a barbecue after. And I remember at one point we were in there and we were benching, and he was just watching and having fun. And finally one day or 1 minute he just set his coffee down. He grabs me and says, "Get the hell out of here." He goes, "Get out of the way." And I watched him grab these guys. He's one of the best strength coaches I've ever seen. And it's when you realize this guy was a truly world-class power lifter. People look to him for his nutrition and supplements and amino acids and this and that. But this guy knows more about strength training. Like he's forgotten more than I'll ever know, and knows more than probably 90% of the strength coaches out there. So just an incredibly a real Renaissance man,
right.
A true Renaissance man.
He still is he's got his website but what's so tough is, as you know, the internet and business and putting your content out has changed so dramatically that, if you and I spoke to, 99% of strength coaches out there, they'll be like, who? I never heard of that guy. And so
that's the problem. We talked
breaks my
we
heart.
talked about this with Tudor Bumpa. Everyone was doing classical periodization, and then Louis Simmons, who taught me a bunch, came out with conjugated, which probably is more like what I do now. However, if you just stuck with that one system, or any of those books that you were talking about, picking up books from the 1960s, the physical culture books, if you actually just did it and really with good form and good nutrition and you slept properly, you probably don't need any other programs. We bounce around, and I think I can't remember. I think it might have been Charles who said that to me once. He told me I have exercise ADD. I can't stick with one system long enough because I was never getting the results I want. He's like, yeah, because you do West Side for a month, and then you do this for a month, and you do that for a month. He said you got to pick one thing and just fucking do it for 2 years. Do it for 2 years. Don't do anything else. Don't waver. Buy in. And we don't do that. We've got this fast food mentality now.
Right. It's also hard, when you're a private facility owner, do people stick with you for a year, let alone 2 years? You have some that come and go. You have some that stay with you forever. On your website, Matt, somebody, when they wrote a testimonial about you, they spoke about your private facility being in a storage closet. So I guess, was that an older one? Or are you now in
that's the current one.
So I didn't see any photos of your gym anywhere. You're inside of what, a health club in a back room, or?
Not at all. We're literally in a storage closet. So I got fired from my job at the Toronto Maple Leafs on a Friday, and I've been working pretty much every day of my life since I was 14. So I had to be somewhere on Monday to go to work. So we used to use this a track, like the track in the football field at a private high school, not far from our arena where the Toronto Maple Leafs were. And I just, reached out to the school and said, hey, I'd already been storing my hurdles and my med balls in this storage room in the back of the hockey arena. I said, would you be okay if I brought some weights up and the guys train in the back of the arena? And they said that was fine. So it was never my plan. That's, it's the furthest thing from these glitzy, glossy, high-end, fancy facilities but you know what? Nobody cared. And we've had world-class athletes. I could run through a list of names of guys that have been there, but nobody cared. They didn't care. We've got no windows. We got no windows. We got no AC. It's boiling hot in the summer. It's freezing cold in the winter, and no one cares.
So you're in the back of a hockey rink?
Look kind of like prison showers, but otherwise the rest of the year we got nothing. If you want to, you can get changed in the bathroom, you get changed in the hallway, you get changed at home. I don't care.
You froze up there for a second. So you were talking about how it's freezing cold in the winter. So you're
yeah, we just, so when I first opened it, it was just because I had nowhere else to go.
Right.
It was never my plan to run the business there, but I remember the first week that I was so embarrassed. I was really embarrassed because I had like the most high profile athlete in Canada, certainly in Toronto, coming up to train at my gym with me. And like, this is a guy who's used to having a steam room and a sauna and a hot tub and a pool and the whole, all the stuff. And then now we're in this shitty little, like, we didn't have a dumbbell rack, all the dumbbells pile, all the bars were leaning against the wall.
Yeah.
Like there was mice in there. It was just bad, right? But nobody cared. Nobody cared. And the one that very first summer, I remember one group workout because everybody wanted to come at the same time one day. And literally guys were waiting outside in the parking lot. They would come in and do their set and then they'd go back outside and wait and no one complained. And it was a real.
How big is the
900 square feet, 950.
That's one of my facilities. I have two, is 960 square feet. Then we kind of have little outdoor area for two sleds, like a cement area. And sometimes you see kids out there like floor pressing they've got a mat under them. We pull a squat rack outside. So you got a 900 square foot facility. So what's like the equipment you had when you first started? Where did you even order equipment from back then?
Well, I had equipment from back in those days. I told you when I was working at the track center where Charlie Francis was.
Yeah.
So, and we had dumbbells from 5 pounds to 150. I had that first year we opened, I had a homemade platform. I had an illegal bar and a Texas power bar.
Yeah.
A bunch of plates and some med balls. That was all I had. And then year by year we added,
Sure.
now we got 3-4 squat racks. We got Kaiser. We have good quality stuff. We've got Kaiser cables on the wall. We got power plates. We got legal competition bars so we have good quality stuff.
Right.
But the stuff that matters. We don't have there's no decor. There's no ambiance. Like that's not what you're paying for.
Right. So you're in the back of a hockey rink.
Yep.
So what about like sled work? You do it outside?
Tons and tons. Yep.
And then I guess it's like us in the winter, you guys get snow, this, that. I guess if it's snowing, you don't go outside. Or
Not usually, but sometimes just mix it up. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Interesting to hear about the Kaiser. I like Kaiser equipment and they've been around since I was a teenager,
Yep.
So what do you have? The air or the cables?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. So the second summer I was there, I bought a cable crossover machine, the
Yeah.
old school,
Sure.
and I had it for a week and I said, no, I just got to go with the Kaisers. They were that much better. So
what do you have? Kaiser? It's like a tower, right?
no, we just have the wall mounted single units that mount right on. I don't know. So in my 950 square foot facility,
right.
anything that can be bolted to the wall or anything that can be up off the floor is up. So we don't have any room. That there's no room for anything that like everyone talks about functional. If it's not functional, it doesn't fit in a 950 square foot room. So anything that's in there has got a purpose,
And I saw on your website, I think you have 3 coaches, right?
Well, we have 3 guys that are there year round full time, but from May to September we swell up to like 8 coaches usually.
In that little spot.
Yep.
So why are people working one-on-one a lot, or
The model we work, so it's if you came in, you're not my client or you're not his client or his client. Everyone's in to train, but if we have 4 athletes, we typically have 4 coaches, at least for the pro groups. For the juniors, we might go, if we have 6 juniors, we might have 3 or 4 coaches.
Yeah, interesting.
But we have, there might be guys down on the track, there might be guys in the gym, there might be guys on the ice all at the same time. There's a lot of stuff going on. So we've got a lot of different coaches doing different stuff.
Yeah, nice. Interesting model, so I work with coaches from a business perspective too. And sometimes they're like, where do I go? And I tell them, look, a lot of times these old churches, they used to be schools and they have these beautiful old gymnasiums and they could use the money you could rent from them. And they don't think like that. They're looking for a standalone warehouse or this big thing. But I'm like, you don't actually need that.
What's funny, you would enjoy this. I probably about the 4th or 5th year that I was in business, I pulled up a business plan that I had from 2000. I was going to open a gym back in 2000, and I looked at my, and I laughed because I would have gone broke. Like I had the best of like the brand new this and a
Right.
brand new that and wood weight treadmill and this. I'm like, I've got like old used dumbbells and this and that. Like my medicine balls are 12 years old, but everything
Yeah.
like you know, because you've lived it and you've done it and you've helped so many other people
Yeah.
do it. But you understand after a while there's certain things that you need to spend on quality. There's
Right.
other things that people just don't, it just doesn't matter. People,
Yeah.
an old sandbag works just as good as the fanciest dumbbell that they got. Dude.
Yeah. And it's interesting that we think that sometimes the pros want fancy, but they sometimes get to this point where they're like, if I go fancy, I lose my edge. And now this other guy takes my spot. So they want the tough training. We've been on the phone or the
Yeah.
Zoom call for like an hour and
We might have
45.
to we might have to cut to phase two next time.
We will totally cut
Chapter two.
phase two. Is there any question or topic you wanted me to ask you about, Matt, or like something you wanted to
No,
close out with?
no, I just enjoyed chatting. I think that the message, your kids are lucky to have you there. I think that
Thank you.
old school, old school, that sometimes that gets a bad connotation or a bad rap, but you know what? There's a reason why some of these things have stuck around for so many years because they work some principles. So I
Right.
think
It's science
you're
with
spreading a good message.
I think with through so much of the years, it's now science with, I don't know, old school, but also practicality. I could kind of just look at a kid's physique and say, you know what? What's the plan today? That kid just needs to squat and do pull-ups today and lunges, like and back extensions. Or, this kid, like he needs more speed. We got to start jumping on hurdles and we need to sprint. Like so sometimes I just look at them and flip the script. But man, I could talk with you all night. I
Well,
could.
we'll have to do chapter two.
We'll do chapter two. How you have your website, Matt Nichol, Matt Nichol.com. Also on Instagram, Twitter. What about if people want to reach out to you? I know you do consulting with pro organizations. Do you consult with I don't know, what do you do that people can reach out to you? I'm sure they're
You
going
know
to
what
want to
they can,
reach out.
I think, I'm all for sharing information, like going on a podcast like this. And I think if people have questions, my policy, if you want free information, then just like I used to be a classroom teacher, if you got a question, there's probably at least one other kid that's got the same question. Fire it off on social media. I'll answer it. And then that way someone else can benefit if they might have been a little too
Yes.
shy to ask that same question. Right.
I do that too. Sometimes I just make it a video or like I turn it into a podcast because yeah, I love doing that too. So yes, reach out to Matt on social. He'll reply back and then we'll do a part two. I mean, how what's right now? We are in mid-November. My high school that I coach at actually at like 7 p.m. they just announced we're going virtual. We'll probably be virtual for 2 weeks because of all this COVID. We were doing pretty good. We don't know what's going to happen with winter sports. The hockey players, cannot compete, or at least,
Terrible.
yeah,
Terrible.
the clubs. I think it's like they can't compete outside of the states. It's crazy. So, what about you?
Yeah,
Is things?
we're currently locked down now. So we're, I mean, it used to be called two. I can't even keep up anymore. I don't know. I just know like I put a mask on and wash my hands and try not to hang around with people I don't know. And I'm not really sure I don't have much of a social life, so I'm not too at risk these days. I'm like you. I go to bed, I get up, I go to work, I come home. I don't really have an opportunity to
Yeah.
do anything cool or exciting where I'm going to cross paths with people. So
That's funny.
yeah,
So time when will things, because hockey is really
we
where
don't
are we
know.
now with pro hockey?
They don't know. I mean, right now, the official word is January 1st, but no one knows for sure if that'll happen. And it's a crazy, crazy period in history we're living in. And I think everyone's sort of living, day to day, if, maybe
Yes.
week to week. So who knows?
Right. All right. So to be continued, we'll definitely do a part two. For everybody listening, I'll post show notes and links back to Matt's information, and also links back to people we discussed. I'll try to pull up old videos of Charlie Francis. I'll see what I could find of Dr. Mauro Di Pasquale. And this way people start kind of
So
researching
let me,
people
yeah,
that
I would
paved the
say this,
way.
Zach. I do
Yeah.
have one thing. So probably one of my biggest mentors that we didn't get around to talking about is Dr. Ken Kanakin.
Oh, yes,
So
Swiss.
if you're looking for all these resources of
Yes.
the true legends of strength and conditioning, Dr. Ken Kanakin's Swiss website, and this, I want to say this about Ken. So
I'll link it to him.
this is important to me because I want to say, because Ken is not only one of my biggest mentors, one of my best friends, but when he started that Swiss conference, I helped him the very first year just running errands and handing out flyers. And I remember when he did this, he said, he's this guy, I've never met a lifelong learner like Ken. He owns every book, every DVD, every VHS tape. He's been to every seminar. Like, he's still taking seminars now. I'm like, why would you even, like, you should be, but he's just obsessed with
Yes.
learning constantly. And I remember when he had the first conference, what he said was this. He said, I'm just going to invite all the guys that I want to see.
Yeah.
And even if nobody comes, it's still going to be, I'm still going to come out ahead because I would have spent so much money flying around and going to other conferences. So I hope I make money. I don't care. I'm just going to have the most awesome conference, and it's going to be so great. He's such a passionate guy. He's such an incredible guy. And if you're looking for any of those people, Charles Poliquin, like, one of the only places he ever presented outside of his own seminar was for Ken. Dr. Di Pasquale doesn't speak anywhere, but he spoke at Swiss. Charlie Francis rarely spoke anywhere, spoke at Swiss. Ken's got an incredible website. It's like Netflix for strength coaches. It's
Correct.
unbelievable, the resources that
I will link it up. I mean, I'm embarrassed to say I have not been to the Swiss conference. My buddy Matt Wenning speaks, Jim Wendler, Dave Tate. It's like
the who's who. It's literally the who's who, you know?
I need to.
Well, you're gonna come to the next one. I'm gonna hold you to it.
I have to. When does he hold that? I don't recall.
Well, when there's not global pandemics, he usually holds them in October, November. So who knows? I don't know.
Okay.
Soon, I hope. Soon, I hope.
All right. I will link to all of these things over at zachevanesh.com. I'll, of course, link back to Matt, his social channels. Man, this was so much great fun.
That was awesome. I really enjoyed chatting.
I had a great time. So everybody listening out there, big thank you. Please leave a review. Matt, hang tight. I'm going to end this recording, and just hang tight, buddy. I'm going to stop.